because when I'm doing this for myself, but also I'm doing it for others to make it feel safe that they can advocate for themselves. I'm not going to, you know, shame them or judge them for them advocating for themselves. I'm going to celebrate that. And that's a really cool place to be. You know what I mean? Like that's really cool to be a soft place to land for people.
You're listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I've spent the last 4 years trying to discover how to break the burnout cycle, and as a high achiever in a fast-paced world, I know how easy it is to slip back into old habits, leaving you feeling overwhelmed and left behind. If you're anything like me, then you need to hear this. Burning out is not your fault. Yes, you can recover from burnout. And the post-burnout growth is not only real, but it feels amazing. This podcast is dedicated to helping break the stigma around mental health in the workplace, ending burnout culture for good, and the action steps that you can take today towards your personal growth and success. So let's do it. Erica, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you for taking the time to join the show today.
Thank you. I'm very, very excited for this. It'll be great.
Erica, when it comes to, as you say, pleasure as healing, do you feel that people have forgotten how to embrace pleasure in their lives?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So much. So much. I always say this quote because I think it's pretty profound, but my teacher would always say pleasure and play, and what we're going to talk about today is the easiest concept to understand, but one of the hardest things to put into practice. So when I go and talk on podcasts or I talk to people, they're like, yeah, 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 like totally, totally. Like I get what you're saying. Like I get the mission that you're trying to say. And then actually putting it into practice, folks often hit blocks, right? Like resistances, things come up of there's so many different reasons that we want to not integrate and incorporate this modality into our life. So for many of us, we're like, yeah, like I'm into it. You know, who doesn't want that? Like our we're like, yes, I'm into it. But then the actual integration can bring up some feels, quite honestly.
It's kind of like anything. If people bring up, oh, you need to exercise more if you want to be healthier, it's like, yeah, exercise sounds easy. And it's like, oh, but when it comes to the consistency or when it comes to making it a habit or a routine and
Yeah,
not having the negative self narratives that are pulling you back, being like, is this really worth the effort? Is this really doing you any good? Why don't you go back to what you were used to do before? And it kind of pulls you back to what was your status quo. And it's
yep.
just they're like, oh, do you really need to make time for that? Wouldn't it be better if you were doing something more productive all the time?
Totally. And it's funny, I remember when I first took like my first like pleasure course. And again, in my brain, I was like, this is gonna be so easy. Like I honestly was doing it from a place of I was already a coach. So I was doing it from a certification, check, 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 check place. You know what I mean? So I was like, I'm gonna do this. This is gonna be great. Like I thought it's so cute and ignorant. Like I thought I was gonna do this thing, check it off, put it on a box, like wrap it up in a bow, put it on a, on the shelf. And what I didn't realize, and thank God, what a gift is, I was like, oh, this is not something that you just do and it's done. Like, sure, it's inside of us and, it's almost like an initiation. But I didn't realize it's a practice and it's a discipline. People like to use different words. Some people say practice, some say devotion, some say discipline, but Cliff Notes is it's something that you keep coming back to time and time again. It's not, I did it once, I'm done. Like it's a, like the working out thing. It's needs that consistency.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I drank a glass of water once.
Right.
It's like it's something that you need to do every day in order to stay healthy, in order to have that balance in your life. It's something that you need to repeatedly do. And
Exactly.
yeah, it's something as well. Like I feel that people, as you said, people overlook it because they say, "Well, that's easy. I can do that anytime," but they don't.
Right. And also, I hear so many different things, right? So, a huge part of my work is reconnecting to this part of us. But before us jumping into the deep end, right, and going full pleasure wild, I have folks kind of go through what stories do they hold around pleasure, right? Like you said, it's like, oh, I could do it, but then are we doing it? And often I hear things like, it's dirty, it's disgusting, it's something I get at the end of, a reward once I lose 20 pounds, once I do that. So it's funny how pleasure for so many people, there's so many stories around it. So of course we don't run towards it. We hold a lot of different tales around it. So why would we run towards it?
But when it comes to pleasure, of course, there's so many different avenues of pleasure, or different
Yeah.
ways that we can experience pleasure in our lives. And
Oh
then, of
yeah.
course, there's stigmas around different areas, but you don't have to, let's say, um, like you can get pleasure in going for a walk. You can get
Yep.
pleasure in listening to music.
Yes, exactly. I often, and that's again like, when people walk into the Zoom room, they're like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, no, 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 we're starting like really small. Like, can you taste the flavors in your kombucha? Can you like pick out the sounds, like you said in the music? Like, oh, I love the guitar. Can you feel the scratch or the sensation on your skin? Like that type of stuff. Because often I always say it's like we become on autopilot so easily, and I talk to people and they're just like, "Oh, I don't know, every Tuesday I just have a turkey sandwich." And I'm like, "That's cool. Like you could you could have the turkey sandwich every Tuesday, but like, do you want the turkey sandwich?" And they're like, "I don't know." Like I've just become so accustomed to the mundane that like I'm not participating. And so that's part of my work is like, can we get back to your aliveness, to you feeling like you're participating with your life?
So if people want to get started with, let's say, embracing pleasure more, like for me, it kind of reminds me of mindfulness. In
Yes.
in a way, it's just even in the mundane things, it's just becoming more focused and more aware and kind of appreciative of the present moment. So
Yeah.
one of my favorite mindfulness practices is mindful eating. So like
Yes.
even when I'm having my lunch, I'm just there like, can I taste, or what's the mouth feel of this sandwich? Or it's like, how spicy, or is there like even a tingler of a spice that I'm feeling in the chili right now? I'm just like, and what is that sensation? Kind of like, does let that linger for a bit? And people are like, are you just a slow eater? And it's like, maybe it's all kind of part of enjoying the food too. I was like, I've
Yeah.
put so much effort into making this food, I might as well enjoy it rather than just swallow it down and have trouble digesting it later. It's being mindful. I'm like, actually really appreciate the food and the fact that I can taste it right now. I mean, you might have a cold, and next thing you can't taste anything. The next thing you're like, oh, I
Right.
really wish I could taste this meal right now, rather than just looking for sustenance. And it's just one of those small practices that you can fit into your day, and just enjoy the food you're eating rather than binge eating, looking for
Yep.
that fix, looking for that dopamine fix from sugar. Just being like, I can taste the individual flavors in this food, or the mouth feel, or the texture.
Exactly.
And you kind of just make it a more mindful practice, and you're kind of very present in the moment.
Yeah, I think most of the honestly, basically all of the pleasure work, you have to have the present moment. And it's funny, so many people are, we have our stories, so it's like, "Oh, pleasure, ew." And I'm like, it could be one of the most spiritual practice because it is rooted in mindfulness. It is rooted in being in the present moment, right? Like if I'm not really in my body, if I'm not really, my acting teacher used to say, "Here I am." We always say before we start a scene, "Here I am right here, right now." It's kind of hard to really enjoy the sandwich. If I'm like having anxiety and ripping myself like on track, which human, I do it sometimes, like it's hard to then be in the pleasure. If I'm future tripping, like what's this da, 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 it's hard for me to really be in the present moment. So I think the it's so interesting that mindfulness is a huge component of this conversation. It can't really happen without it. Like they're quite intertwined.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think of pleasure, they think of escapism. And
Yes,
they're
exactly.
trying to run away from something, and that's why they say, oh,
Yes.
pleasure helps me to escape from this for a little while. rather than
Totally.
being more present in the moment and being like, oh, I can wind down and use this for a bit so that I can rest and recharge and then return to whatever's bothering me, maybe with a more refreshed or clear mind, rather than stressing
Yes.
over it constantly. And next thing going like, okay, I'm just going to escape into this for 10 minutes, an hour or 2 hours, or sleep on it, and then come back to the same problem, dreading that same problem the next
Yep.
day.
Exactly. It's funny. I talk about this quite frequently, but just because it's top of mind, last night I had a client and we were talking about, she was saying like I feel it in my system, especially since I've practiced pleasure. I feel my nervous system. I need it again. And we were talking about the discernment of when it goes to avoidant territories. When we were saying, like, okay, how can we use the pleasure in a healthy way that helps us resource, helps us fuel up? But like you said, are we using it as an avoidance tool? And we have to track that, right? Like, and it's funny, I think this was so permission giving for me. I was teaching in the world of pleasure for a very long time. And I remember one of my coaches said the something that's not talked about in this industry a lot, especially my particular branch of the pleasure world is so often I would hear people, I'd go on retreats and people would say that's not in my pleasure, like an event, like in ways that you're like, wait, what? Like, you help humanity, and they'd be like, that's not in my pleasure. And it's perverted what pleasure really means. And so my coach was talking about, I think this helped me so much. First of all, that's not true pleasure, that's something different. But what she was saying, she's like, something that could be so profound is pleasure can also be the pleasure of doing the hard thing, right? Like, oh, I don't want to go for the walk. Okay, but I was in my body, and the pleasure of I did it. So I think there's also just such a misconception about what it is, and I'm glad that you brought that to light, because sometimes people hear these conversations and they're like, that's so exciting, but ooh, am I gonna use it in a way that's indulgent or that I avoid? And so I think that's part of the nuance, is having discernment of, am I using this as a tool to soothe and fill myself up and show up from alignment, or am I using this tool to harm? Am I using this? I always say to my clients, let's be mindful to not use this tool as a weapon against ourselves for anything. Like, even mindset. If they're like, I didn't do mindset, I didn't do this. I'm like, hold on. We don't want the tool. We don't want to use these things are supposed to be tools to support us, to be weapons against ourselves. And so I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's really important of discerning how we're relating to the thing.
Yeah, of course, because that's where you come across it a lot, where people, especially you have this stoicism and macho mentality where it's like, oh, you have to knock out all of these pleasure fixes in your life, and you have to do the hard stuff, you have to do the hard work, and you have no
Right.
time for winding down. And it's like that's how you burn everyone out, make them feel
Yes.
completely useless and worthless, and they berate themselves then for taking a moment to rest and to recharge because they feel, oh no, I'm giving into the simple pleasures that I shouldn't be because I'm supposed to be a man. And next thing you're like, no, you need to take the time for yourself, know your own capacity. You might only have 40% energy today. And if you do 40% today, then that's your 100%. Then it's time to
Exactly.
rest and recharge. And you might have 100% tomorrow. But you also have to show yourself a little bit of compassion. You have to give yourself that time to rest and recharge. And that could be going for a walk. It could be going to the gym. It could be meeting up with friends. It could be making a nice meal for yourself. It could be binging Netflix for an hour or two and being okay with that, not shaming
Yes.
yourself for taking that time. But
Exactly.
as long as you're not throwing yourself into it and then shaming yourself, oh, I've just spent the last 2 hours watching Netflix, I might as well make it an 8 hour binge and then shame myself for the rest of the week that I wasted so much time. If you're not,
Right.
it's again, as you said, using it as a weapon against yourself rather than being like, okay, I need to take the time to relax. So I'm going to give myself permission to use this time to relax in my own way. But I will get back to the hard work once I've given myself the time to recharge.
Totally. And I want to just name this because I think it's important. is for me that I'm just naming some of the fears is I remember being very anxious when I first was introduced to this work because I was like, ugh, like, am I going to lose time? Am I going to lose resources? Like, there was a big fear. I always say, like, and I was joking to my client yesterday, like, we want to be robots. Like, we don't want to, but like, there's a part of us that's like, our brain operates so quickly. And I remember I was fearful of like, oh, if I get given to this pleasure thing, am I gonna like everyone says slow down? Like, am I gonna not be able to keep up with business? And is things like it really for me triggered scarcity in all areas of my life. I was quite fearful. I want to name that if that's coming up for anyone. And what I learned was very annoying. My friend Leora Edut, she always says you have to slow down to slay. And she's right. Because I was like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And what actually ended up happening was I healed the burnout. And so I didn't realize I was burnt out first and foremost, but I was healing the burnout. And then I could show up even better from a bigger place of service. It was totally different. And I want to name that fear that like some of us are like, oh, I don't want to give into this thing because I'm scared. I'm scared what's going to happen. And again, there's the story of, oh, it's going to be selfish if I focus on this. I have a family. I have whatever. I have work to do. I have things. This is selfish. And what ends up happening is it's one of the most selfless things you could do because you know how to take care of yourself. I know for me, I always say I'm in one of my highest forms of integrity because when I'm self-resourced, I'm not like grabbing at anyone. You know what I mean? I'm not energetically like being a little, sneaky and being like, oh, I need to grab this and I need to take this. Like, I know how to take care of myself. I'm resourced. When I'm resourced, I can overgive to family. I can overgive to, and not overextend, but overgive to family and friends and clients. Like, I can show up. And I know we talk about that a lot in our world, right? Like, oh, it's when you give to yourself, you give to others. But I was resistant to that. And I'm here to say, if you're resistant to that too, that's okay. And for me, I found there was truth to it. I really showed up corny, but as my best self when I knew how to take care of myself.
Yeah, I had a guest on before, Gabriel Shaw, and he was a caregiver, and
Mm,
he explained it beautifully as well, the difference there when it came to caregiver burnout and burnout in the healthcare industry, and it was around the difference between caregiving and caretaking. And when you're burnt out and you're living in that autopilot mode that you're expecting, no matter how you are of service to others, you're expecting them to reciprocate. So
mm,
you're not actually caring for another. You're
yes.
providing a service and expecting them to give you the appreciation that you crave. And when you
Right.
don't receive that, then you're expending energy, you're not feeling anything back, and then you start to burn out. And that's what he realized he needed to come from a better place of service. He needed to recharge his reserves first, and then he could
Yes.
be of better service to others. And he said, especially when you're
Yes.
dealing with older people, and they're not always going to be like, "Oh, thank you for taking care of me every hour of the day." It's going to
Yeah.
be expected of as well because you're being paid for the service. And and he's like, if you're not receiving the thank yous all the time, that's okay because you're doing it as a service, you're providing it to them. You're not expecting to say thank you every time you pick them up and put them down.
Yes. Exactly. I'm sure you've heard of this before, but this is powerful in my brain. I always tell this to clients is I have them think of it. I'm big into images. So for me, I have my clients and me think of our internal resources almost like a bank account or in the green or the red. And life just sometimes gives us red. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we're victimized by circumstances, or sometimes naturally you just go red, or it's it's a deposit or a takeaway, like a withdrawal. Like sometimes that just happens. And so I always have my clients kind of get back into the green. Or I say, how can we add deposits? What's a deposit for you? And someone might be like, you know what? I know that I have people that work in the healthcare field. I know work takes so much out of me. I know I need to actually beef up a little bit this week because I know this week's going to be really hard. So I am going to give myself that 5-minute walk, or I am going to do that 2-minute meditation because I know I'm gonna have a lot. I'm gonna be in the red, and that's okay. Like I'm at peace with that, but I need to make sure that I'm taken care of so I can give, so I'm not at total withdrawal in the bank account. And I think that's a powerful example. I sometimes try to check in with myself and be like, where am I? And I'm like, ooh, I'm in the red. And that's cool. Like I don't have to make it mean anything, but like how can I start to add more green? How can I start to preserve a little bit more? How can I nurture more? Because you know the deal. When I could take care of myself, I could really show up for others in much bigger ways.
So if someone does want to get started, or they feel like I'm always in the red, but I don't have any time or any
Yeah,
energy to even get started. I wouldn't even know where to get started. What's the first step that you tell them, okay, well, this is the one place where you can get started?
I love that. I think that's the powerful thing about this work is I actually wouldn't suggest going 120. Sometimes people hear this work and they're like, I don't have the money to go to a spa. I'm like, you don't need a spa. Like, you know what I mean? Or I don't have like, or I don't have the time to do a vacation. And I'm like, we love those things. You know, we'll all say yes to that. You know, bring it in. But that's not accessible all the time. And that's not the end. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. So even if it's, oh my gosh, the example, right? Like, I'm driving 5 kids to school. They're screaming, they're pulling my hair. I'm dealing with the full-time job, whatever, all the chaos. Can I feel like as simple as like, can I put a hand over my heart? And it might not be, it's, if we're talking about that deposit thing, right? It might not be we're putting in a thousand green little checks, but it might be one. Like, can I take a deep breath? Can I, while people are screaming and life feels like it's wild, like, can I slowly, just for quite literally 2 seconds, enjoy my coffee? It doesn't need to be these grand, we all want, like, that sounds fun, the grandiose, I always say to everyone, we don't have to be on a chaise lounge, like eating grapes, like that's everyone envisions that, like, we don't need that. Again, we'll take it, but it's those very micro moments. So even if you're driving back and forth here and there, can you slowly listen to that song, even for 2 seconds? Hmm. Okay, back to chaos. So really, I always start folks micro step, and those things over time start to compound and start to snowball and start to give us that replenishment. So I say that yeah, I want to say that it's not, it doesn't have to be this whole thing. It doesn't have to be a 5 hour ritual. It doesn't have to be this whole morning routine that's, you know,
Yeah,
not everyone has access to.
yeah. I even when I was between jobs, I started my whole morning routine as part of okay, this is part of me recovering from burnout, and I was like, okay, and I had this 3 hour morning routine, and it was good for a couple of weeks, but then I
Yeah,
realized I was like, okay, I'm doing all of the things, but what one thing is the most effective out of that 3 hour routine? I was like, how can
yes,
I narrow it down? And instead of doing all the things every morning, maybe I can do one of those things each morning. And it doesn't have to be a 3 hour routine. It could have been a 20-minute routine or a 30-minute routine. And it was just like, I was
totally.
like, it just made life so much easier. And it's like, okay, now I don't need to shame myself for feeling tired from doing such a long routine in the morning. Or
Yeah.
now I can use those hours to do something a bit more productive and feel good about myself.
Yep. Exactly. And I think I want to throw this back that we are talking about before. Like, so much of this work is about being present. And for me, I love all the pleasure practices. Again, like I want to go to the pleasure yoga retreat. Like I want to do all those things because that's for me is so fun. I love this work. But what's been so powerful is finding the peace, being present in the chaos. So yesterday, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I had a great time. I was out with my nephews. They quite literally were pulling my hair. Like we had a blast. Like it just was chaos around, but fun chaos. But like, well, like overwhelming energy. And I tried to, my intention was find the peace, find the pleasure, even in the craziness, And so that's what we're talking about is like, how do I find peace? How do I find that little inch of my joy, even amidst a crazy world? That's what we're getting after.
What I feel though, especially in our generation, again, we coming back to the taboo around the pleasure. It's just they're like, but you don't have the time for that, especially in the workplace. You don't have the time to wind down. We need productivity here. We need so many all the projects done. And while there is like there is the we have all these recreational activities that are ways for you to wind down. We have all the chairs and the sofas around the office, but no one wants to be seen using them because they don't want to be
Yep.
perceived as being lazy. And it's like yes, they can decorate the office as much as they want and be like, oh yes, we've got a very relaxing atmosphere for our staff, but at the same time, people feel they're judged if they actually sit down
Of
for 15
course.
minutes to have a breather.
Right. I think which talks into, I think that's such so powerful that you said that. I think that talks exactly into all of us change, like we culturally as a society, religion, like there's so many different conditioning, so many different conditions that we're talking about this, right? Like we can have all the meditation rooms, we can have all the ping pong tables, we can have all the kombucha on tap in a corporate office, and people still are like, I feel embarrassed, I feel ashamed. And I think that speaks to the narrative. Like we can say we are mental health forward, but are we? Like, thank God we've made progress, but are we? Like that's a lot of time people feel shame. I wanna, if I may, I'd love to give a powerful question that I like to ask myself a lot, and I forget, and I have to come back to it. But I always ask myself, in this moment, how can I, or I should say, how can I make this moment more pleasurable? So if you're at work, you're not going to be, again, not going to be able to do a whole pleasure practice. But maybe, I know for me, even if I'm like typing a newsletter or something, for me, it might just be relaxing my shoulders, maybe putting on some jazz music. If you don't have access, accessibility to that, just taking a deep breath. You know what? I'm going to walk to the bathroom and just wash my hands. So throughout every situation throughout the day, it's almost like different frames, right? Like I'm at the grocery store, pleasure. I'm at work, pleasure. And because we're in different like snapshots throughout the day. And I ask myself, how can I add more pleasure to this moment? And sometimes it could be like something so outrageous and fun, and sometimes it's as little as my shoulders dropping and just taking a deep breath and feeling, oh, I feel my body, or I needed a sip of water. But I think that's how we start to reclaim this. And eventually, maybe it will feel safe to sit in the in that little like comfy meditation at work. Maybe it won't. But this is about us reclaiming our power and reclaiming feeling safe and feeling good and feeling nourished. Because I want to say this too, and I know you'll probably agree with me, is we have this like big self-care conversation, and it's hard to go from burnout to then all of a sudden I see people burn out, kind of be on robot mode to then like I should take care of myself. And there's like there's a break, stop, start thing. It's like, how? And this work that I'm talking about, asking yourself, how can I add more pleasure? That's the balm in between. Does that make sense? Like that's the bridge to all of this. It's really hard to be in overwhelm and and then all of a sudden relax. We're like, I can't. Like my body is in a state of like tension and burnout. Like, are you kidding me? I can't now do a pleasure activity. I don't even like I can't. And so these little adjustments, like I said before, compound um and help us. So I just want to name that. I think that's important, and it gives us I don't know, for me at least, and for some of the people I work with, it's empowering to be like, oh, in this situation that feels not the best, how can I reclaim a little bit of peace? How can I reclaim a little bit of power?
Yeah, because even in that moment where you're like, oh, I need to do this for myself, we've been conditioned so much to be busy all the time or to be productive
Yes.
that instead of taking that moment, you feel, oh, I can get a dopamine fix from um categorizing all of my emails and doing the busy work. It's like, oh, I look busy and I'm going to feel accomplished if all of my emails are organized into folders and it's completely wasted time. Where I
Hmm.
mean, if you want to look for an email, you can just hit the search bar. I never organize my emails, and people are looking at me like, "Oh, did you not take 3 or 4 hours to put all of your emails into different categories?" And I'm like, "What's the point? I can do so much more in my day." And
Right.
but at the same time, it's the dopamine fixes that people can get
Hmm.
from things like, and if it's making them look busy, or else they make it look like they're doing an Excel and they're scrolling through TikTok on their phones because they're getting a dopamine fix off that. But none of this
Yes.
is self-serving in any way. It's not taking a moment for themselves. It's all mindless activity that makes them feel busy or makes them feel productive, but is not helping them become more attuned to themselves and how they're actually
Yeah.
feeling.
Yes. And I think I just want to highlight this because I think this is powerful that the wording you keep saying is moment. It's a moment. And I think that's powerful because when we start to do this work, it's like, I'm scared. I'm scared. Like I talked about before. Am I going to be selfish? Am I going to be lazy? So much of our worth is wrapped up into work and productivity. And so I really love that you said just a moment, just a moment. Like if you still want to organize your emails, go for it. And not my ADHD brain. Like that's not for me. But if that's for someone, if that like helps them, go for it. But as you organize those emails, how are you? Another thing I want to throw in is I have people, it's a tool it's a scale, it's a pleasure scale. And I have people check in. Am I feeling crusty? Like, am I feeling like a little crusty dusty? And that's okay. Or am I feeling alive and pretty aligned? If they're aligned and alive, great. If they're feeling, I don't feel, I feel a little contracted. My question is, how can we, like a barometer, just raise it like one or two? And that's when, what could I do to add more pleasure? And so I say that again, it gives us back our power. And it's just a moment. Maybe it's, I just have a moment. I'm at work and I still want to organize those emails. It makes me feel in control. Great. But as I do that, can I listen to the jazz music? As I do that, and I'm like doing my email thing, can I take a deep breath? So it's like, what's so powerful about this to come back to the moment thing is it's just a moment, but we're taking back our power. We're more in control versus the anxiety, the fear running us. Like we get to be a little bit more authors in our own tale, like we're a little bit more in control.
Yeah, it's how do they put it? Like not being the NPC, kind of being the hero in your journey, or treating yourself like the main character. It's that you're
Yes.
putting yourself first. Um, where a lot of people, they kind of live by other people's narratives, and they're people pleasing. They don't want to upset anyone, or they don't want to be seen as the lazy one, but they're not putting themselves first. If you put
Yep.
yourself first and you're the main character, no one cares what you do. You're running around and you're doing your own thing. If you're playing a video game or something, and like no one cares if you're running in circles for 20 minutes. But
Right.
it's like putting yourself first. I think everyone does that. That everyone thinks that everyone is judging them every moment of the day, no, which way they look, what way they're sitting, when they're taking their coffee break, when they take a moment even just to stretch, and they feel like, oh,
Yes.
everyone is constantly judging me. Everyone else is worrying about themselves and worrying, should they be stretching? Should they be getting up for a coffee?
Exactly. It's so funny. I years ago I had a therapist and I was very obsessed what people thought. And she was like, Erica, like I was just like, and then what if they think this? And what if they think this? She was like, I'm so sorry. There is science behind this that like people really care about themselves. Like and how that like they might think for a second, but they care about, like you said, how they come off in the world. And I also wanna add too, what's been so powerful for me for this work was, and to be honest, it still comes through because it's just a tendency, is really strong people pleasing vibes. I had that before this work. And again, it still comes out, but so I have to track it. But for me, when I started to really take care of myself, I had it was really cool as in the past, I'd get really angry. I'd have a lot of resentment because I was not taking care of myself. So when someone else went to take care of themselves, I was like, what? Like, what was so powerful in this work was I was allowed to have now more transparent conversations. So I can go to someone and be like, listen, I'm so sorry I can't come to this event. Like I could be more transparent. And I appreciate that in other people now, where before it kind of triggered me. You know what I mean? Like now I'm like, yes, like I genuinely am so thrilled when people take care of themselves. And they're like, hey, like if I have a client and they're like, hey, I'm really burnt out. I don't think I can make this session. Are you going to be mad at me? I'm like, no, like that's the point of this work. Like, please go do your thing. And so I think that was so powerful for me. And also when I started to do it, and when we start to do this work, it gives permission for others. Like there's a Marianne Williamson quote, something like, um, what is it? When I essentially like when I shine, it gives permission for others to shine. And that's the same thing. Like if you see someone doing their thing, like living in their truth, taking care of themselves, it gives a message like, oh, that's safe to do that. So this is part of the reasons why like talking about being service based, like this work is so powerful because when I'm doing this for myself, but also I'm doing it for others to make it feel safe that they can advocate for themselves. I'm not going to, you know, shame them or judge them for them advocating for themselves. I'm going to celebrate that. And that's a really cool place to be. You know what I mean? Like that's really cool to be a soft place to land for people.
I love that because that reflected when I first started the podcast, it was because I wanted to document my own burnout recovery because I didn't see many other people doing that. And 90% of the feedback that I got when I did that was so negative. It was people being like, how dare you? How dare you talk about that? It was bringing up all of the uncomfortable and raw feelings in them when I was sharing
Mm,
my story.
yeah.
And their objective was to get me to shut up and be quiet and stop sharing all of these feelings. And I saw that straight off. I was like, okay, there people are really uncomfortable with me sharing this. I need to share more so that we can normalize this conversation. And it was funny because I was, as you said, me shining, allowing other people to shine, but they didn't want to shine because they knew that it was going to take work and it was going to be
Yes.
raw. It was going to be uncomfortable for them to be aware of that. And they'd rather continue to live on autopilot and keep job hopping and trying to find, okay, oh, it was this boss, it was a bad boss, it was a bad manager. I'm just going to have to find the right job with the right manager that's going to cure all of my problems, rather than looking within and seeing, is this aligned with me? Do I need to find something that's more in alignment? If everything is not in alignment, are there things within me that I need to change?
Mm,
Or am I just looking for the wrong things all the time if I keep on finding myself hopping around? Why can't I
right.
commit to the one thing? What is the incongruency here? And it was me bringing up those things in people that at first they deflected, but over time they were like, oh, that I can relate to that. Okay, what can I do here? And how can I change this? And I'd always start with the trigger warning, being like, this is going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to bring up a lot of things that you're not, that other people are not saying to you because they're just giving you the small talk. I'm bringing up the deep questions, and it's not going to be comfortable. And yes, you're probably going to hate me. And definitely burning bridges with some people because it's like, okay, this is not what people normally talk about. But it's like, but these are the conversations that people just brush under the rug, that they don't
Right.
have, and that people are either acting out because they have no way of expressing these emotions, or else they're checking out and being like, okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not even going to regulate this emotion. I'm just going to either avoid it or escape into something else. And
Yep.
it's like, how do we get to have these deeper conversations with people when the easier option is just to continue to live like a drone and live on autopilot and not address the bigger issue, not address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, it's powerful. I often see and I went through this too. I often see clients be like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize through this work, I thought everything would be shiny and sparkly," which a lot is, but I didn't realize I started to become a mirror for people. And they started to get really mad at me, like, and they started, and I'm like, yeah, I know it's a painful part of this work is some people are so resistant, and it's triggering. And even me, I remember, and sometimes still, like when I'm like wobbly on things, I know I'm like, oh, I'm so mad at this person because I'm triggered. And I was so triggered by the pleasure work at first. And I still hit roadblocks, because there's different, it's a relationship, so there's different pieces. But sometimes seeing people in their pleasure, I'd be like, ew. Like, in all of all of my stories came up. I was like, I'm disgusted. And I was like, okay, like this is, I have to comb through what's coming up. And so yeah, it's funny. That's like the underbelly of some of this work is like, ugh, like the sticky stuff that comes up with it.
Yeah, and even as well, I found it as well when I go out socializing and people ask like, "Oh, what's the work you do?" And people expect you to say, "Oh, this is my job, but I don't really like it, but it's just what I do." And the next thing, when I say, "This is what I do for work, this is what I get to do, and I
Yeah.
love it, and I really enjoy it," and people are like, "Oh, we kind of hate you now because you actually enjoy your work." And I find that fascinating that it's like you're expecting me to say that I hate my job, that I hate what I do for over 50% of my week. And and the common answer you want me to say is that I hate this, but I'm living for the weekend. Whereas it encourages me then to ask them, I was like, okay, what would you love to do instead? Why are you spending 5 out of 7 days on something that you really don't like? Is unless it's working towards a future goal,
Right.
unless there's a reason behind why you're working towards this, that you're putting in the hard work now so that you can work towards something in the future, or is it just people putting in, this is what's expected of me, this is what I've been told to do, so I'm just going to live this way for the next 40 years and then see what I'll do in retirement. And for some people, they're okay with that. But for a lot of people, I'm seeing the resistance to it. And while they're saying they're okay with this, they're not truly living. And you can see
Right.
it in how they act outside of work, how they are in their relationships, how they are in different activities, and how they're procrastinate. They have what do they call it? Is it sleep procrastination? Where they're
Yes, I know. Yep.
delaying, yeah, they're delaying how
Hmm.
much time they like different activities to delay going to bed so that they
Yes.
can do other activities before starting work in the morning.
Yeah, I always say to my clients, I use the term revenge pleasure. And essentially it's like it's the sleep procrastination, right? It's like when people are like, I haven't had enough pleasure throughout the day. And that could be pleasure just like, I always say like touching your face, make sure you have drink enough water, like that, and they revenge pleasure. So they're up till 3 a.m. I get it. They're up till 3 a.m. on TikTok. They binge ate that day. They watch TV and they're like, which is fine, but like, oh my God, I sucked into 5 hours of something I really, it did not feel good doing. And so that's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's where a lot of people get sucked into the side of on where the taboo around pleasure is because they see the
Yes.
dark side of all these pleasurable activities, and they say, oh,
Right.
that it's not productive, it doesn't serve me, it's actually sabotaging a lot of other areas of my life. And it's like, okay, are there certain activities that have no benefits? And yes, there are some that are very damaging that people go to
Yeah.
because they're very, they go into escapism and things like that, and they completely detach themselves from living a fulfilled life and connecting with
Totally.
others. They socially isolate and everything, and just go into different forms of escapism. Whereas, and I think a lot of technology is designed that way as well. In terms of TikTok and Candy Crush and the likes, they're marketed and they're designed by scientists to be addictive. But it's about us trying to, and it's about us trying to develop how to have a healthy relationship with technology, that
Mm.
we don't become addicted to it. That we see, yes, it has its use, and yes, it can be pleasurable, but we also need to limit our use or moderate our use before, let's say, you get to a point of diminishing returns.
Right. Right. And I think that's like important too. Like really checking in with ourselves and being like, right, because sometimes we're like, oh, I'm gonna do this pleasurable activity. I'm gonna watch Netflix or I'm gonna scroll on TikTok. But I think having a conversation with ourselves and being like, is this fueling me? And sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm deciding that I'm gonna go unconscious for 30 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, and that's cool. Like I'm deciding I do want to escape for a moment, but consciously getting on board with that. But so often I don't think we are part of the conversation. It's just the autopilot of I guess I'm sitting in front of the TV. Guess I'm eating and like I'm not paying attention to anything that's going in my mouth. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think bringing ourselves part of the equation is what's so powerful to this conversation, right? Like, is this serving me? Does this feel good to scroll? No shame, but like, how am I? And I think that's, I always ask my clients, like, what do you need? And they're like, oh my God, it's so annoying. But like, then now they're starting to be like, what do I need? What do I need? And what do I need? And like, how am I? And it's like that barometer. Like, does this feel good? Is this holding me? Is this supporting me? Is this nourishing me? Or is this depleting me? And sometimes again, we might choose, it's a depleting me a little bit. But like I think the power of this is the choice. And often I found myself kind of going on autopilot and not choosing. It's funny. I think actually when we first spoke a few weeks ago, I actually had this really this revelation. I don't know if I shared this with you on our own, is that I was tracking my behavior and my non-choices were choices. So I think I was being really cute about it. And I was like, oh, like I was being avoidant, but I was choosing. And that's okay. But like I was choosing to like scroll and scroll and scroll and to watch hours and hours and not to support myself. But I think I was like, I'm not choosing, but I was. And that's cool. But I had to get like real with myself. And now I'm trying to be we have seasons and cycles, and I'm trying to be like, okay, what do I want to choose now? What supports me now? And maybe it is TikTok. Maybe it's absolutely not get outside of the house. Maybe it's, this or that. But I just wanted to presence that regardless what the medium is of the pleasure, whether it's touch, whether it's the five senses, bringing ourselves part of the equation is needed. So it doesn't, again, feel like a weapon against ourselves.
It's funny you mentioned that because I went through I don't think we touched on that the last time, but it was something that I was going through also. I noticed how much time was I spending just mindlessly scrolling,
Right.
and how much of my day was being wasted. So I just got an app that blocked out all of my social media for 12 hours. So I was like, okay, all the
Genius.
daylight hours. Okay, if I clicked on Instagram and said, oh, you locked yourself out of this, it must have been for a reason. And this thing was like, okay, I can't look at it. And then for
Yes.
even the times when it was unlocked, it would have a timer of either 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I was like, how long do you want to spend on this? And sometimes I'd set it for 5 minutes. And next thing the timer will go off. And I tried to remember, I was like, was I actually doing something on it? Or was I checking a notification? Or was I scrolling? And if I said, well, I was already scrolling after 5 minutes and I couldn't even remember what video I was watching, okay, I've spent way too much time on it already after 5 minutes. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I've probably saved myself 2 or 3 hours of mindless scrolling through videos and sending 99 videos to one of my friends. I probably saved them a lot of time in their day too. So I was like, okay, this is probably serving me and others a lot more by me putting a limit on how much time do I actually spend scrolling every day. And
Yes.
and it was being more mindful of when I'm using it too. It was like, is it when I'm at work? Is it when I get home from work? Is it before I go to bed? And are those times when I'm using social media actually helping me? Is it helping me to unwind? Or is it just a distraction from not being alone with my own thoughts?
So true. And it's kind of like anything. I mean, we know this, but it's kind of like anything. Not that I believe in the whatever, the everything is moderation thing, but because it's not, I think it's beyond that. I think it's more nuanced and deeper than that. But I think it's about what's our relationship to this? Like we talked about before, like it's food for me has always been a thing, right? Like food has always been a thing that I've worked through my whole life. And I just have to see how I'm relating to it. Because food could be, let's talk about pleasure. Food could be such a beautiful relationship where it could fill us up, quite literally, give us nutrients, be pleasurable, blah, blah, blah. But when does it start to go into harm? Like for how I in the past have used food. Same with social media, right? There could be so many beautiful, we could have access to meditations and things that light us up, but when can it be harm? And so it's almost like it's anything. We have to really check in with ourselves and be like, not when is it's a good thing enough, because I don't really subscribe to that, but where's my, where am I full? Quite literally, where am I full? Like, where does this, ooh, this is a perfect amount. I'm satiated. I'm going to step away now. But often I think, especially like you said, that talk about social media, these things are built for addiction. These things are built for hooking us in. And often I have to be like, wait, where am I? Like, where's Erica in this? Like, do I want to engage with this? But I think that's relationship with most pleasure things is getting what we need to feel alive, sustained, nurtured, and starting to give it space when it starts to become toxic and starts to hurt us and harm us.
Yeah, it's being aware of our relationship with it. Again, with social media and things, attention is the currency. And one of
Yes.
the things that, especially in entrepreneurship, is where you kind of blur the line, is when you're like, oh, but I'm doing it for my social media marketing. I'm doing it. I need to put that post up every day. But then you find yourself, oh, I'm just tracking the analytics, and it's like you're going back and you're seeing how many likes did I get, how many follows did I get? Is this for engagement? Or is it me trying to get external validation by looking for those likes and looking for those follows and looking for those shares? And it's
Yes.
all of those activities build up, and you're like, okay, is this a healthy relationship with social media? And it's like, can I limit myself to looking at social media once per day, and or not looking at my news feed and only seeing, did someone DM me, and I can reply to that DM, and avoid the news feed, or avoid looking at how many likes I got. And
Right.
if you feel uncomfortable there, it's like, okay, now I need to be aware. What is my relationship with social media? Am I looking for validation there? And why? Why am I looking for validation there?
Right. Right. And I think you just named it again. Like the core of all of this is awareness and mindfulness, which often in this conversation there's not a lot of, because it's like you said, the currency is attention, and just like mindlessness, mindlessly scrolling. So I think it's powerful that the power is in the mindfulness. And like we said before, like us having our voice in there, like what feels good to me, what's right for me, isn't usually part of the equation. But I'm glad that you kind of shouted that out. Like, that was like the subtext, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I preach. It's all around self awareness. It's one
Yes.
of the things, when we're burnt out, it's usually from a downward spiral of so many negative things. Next, you try to dull out the negative, and then you escape or avoid it by living on autopilot and
Yes.
throwing yourself into more work, trying to be more productive, trying to achieve more and succeed in more and look for that validation, rather than addressing what's the core issue behind this? What is the root problem? Why am I seeking all of this and over pursuing and overachieving in different areas, because you're trying to make up for a lack in somewhere else, or you're trying
Right.
to seek validation from others because you don't feel your own, or you don't realize your own self-worth.
Yeah. And I think this we should say this really quickly. The self-worth conversation with the pleasure, I think, is super potent and super powerful. Um, Again, my journey, I won't get lost in it, like lost in the sauce too much, but for me, I didn't have a powerful relationship to self-love. And pleasure was one of those things that was very transformational for me and healing, because it did something for my brain. It did something for my body, right? Like if I did a pleasure activity, even enjoying, we'll go back to enjoying the kombucha, but like if enjoying the kombucha or listening to the music, I was teaching my brain and my body that I'm worthy and deserving of having good things. And so I just wanted to shout out like how so directly correlated self-love is to pleasure. I worked for years with like a therapist. That was great, a therapist and this and that to uncover things. But the pleasure work really taught my brain, really taught my body, Erica, it's safe to have good things. You're worthy of good things. You're worthy of that delicious kombucha. You're worthy of, that beautiful piece of art. You can have that. And so I just wanted to name that if there's still some hesitation around pleasure, I've seen it time and time again unlock some really potent self-love, confidence in people.
Yes, and again, touching on the self-love, it's a lot of the time people look for the external validation or they seek it in relationships with
Yes.
others, and they're like, no, they expect it of the other partner to give them the love that they crave or the appreciation that they crave, rather than looking inwards and seeing, why do I crave it from others? Is it because I cannot give it to myself? Is it
Right.
because you have that? I call it the niggling negative self narrative. It's the saboteur in your own head that's always putting you down. And even if you receive compliments from others, you want to receive the compliments from others, but you don't actually accept them. You kind
Yeah.
of deflect the compliment in some way, or you self deprecate and make a funny joke. And if someone compliments you and you say, "Oh, this old thing I've had this top for years," or someone compliments you on how you present your hair, it's like, "Oh, this is just the way I woke up," and rather than being like, "Yeah, I actually took some time, and thank you. This took a lot of effort this morning. Thank you. I really appreciate it." Rather than
Yes.
showing the appreciation, or thanking the other person for the compliment and fully appreciating it yourself and being aware is like, "Oh wow, they really complimented me, and that feels good." A lot of the time people don't accept um, recognition from others, and they also don't give themselves the same compassion themselves, and say like, I put a lot of effort into myself today and I feel great about it. I feel pretty awesome.
Yes. Yeah, I know. And it's a big, yeah, it's the self-love. I'm glad you brought that up. The self-love conversation is powerful. And also, again, I'm really grateful that we're having these conversations. It's becoming more normal in our world to talk about self-love and self-care. But like you said, it's much deeper, than just I'm gonna put on a face mask or I'm just gonna, this I'm just it's a deep practice. And I think I'm really glad that we got into so many different uh tools today in a way, because I think they directly correlate to that self-love journey.
And even at that, this is again just the beginning of the conversation
Totally.
for everyone. It's like this is just
Yes.
surface level, and this is where you get started. But
Yes,
Erica, if
agreed.
people do want to connect with you and hear more about We the Light, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Totally. I love that. Definitely the website. I feel like all my stuff it lives on my website, which is www.wethelight.org. Um, I'll say this briefly. I'm big into free resources. I think everyone should have access to this work. I think it's a privilege that we should all have, and we should have this accessibility. So for me, that means I give a ton of free tools away. I want people to be stocked with tools and resources. So with that being said, I have a podcast, a free ebook, and that's on the website, wethelight.org. You get that all there. And then also I give away, for people that are like, something sparked. I want to talk deeper, like someone that wants to go a little bit deeper one-on-one. I have a mojo makeover assessment. Essentially what it is, it's a discovery call, but we really spend that hour taking time to feel, what's dusty, crusty? What do we want to shed? What do we want to let go of? And then we talk about goals, desires, dreams, how you want to show up. If anything in this conversation resonated, we talk about that. And then if it's a fit, we do talk about working together. If not, the blessing about being in this industry is I have so many resources. And if people are like, you know what, Erica, do you have someone that you could connect me here? Of course. So it's a win-win for all. And that's also free. And I always tell people if something in this work sparked take it up because it's free. You know, and it's really quite literally no strings attached. That's also on my website, the Mojo Makeover Assessment. Like I said, all the resources are on wethelight.org. And if you're like, I want to see you on Insta, that's wethelight_LLC.